All right, so you go to Arista, you get signed by Clive, and the first record is from South Africa to South Carolina, and this definitely takes you guys to a new level. Like I mentioned, the intro, part of that was Saturday Night Live, where I saw you guys.
Correction. The first one was First Minute of a New Day.
Oh, that one preceded it. Okay, because they both came out in '75, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So that one then, still, certainly there was a lot more to your guys' sound. I noticed more elaborate percussion, and you had tracks like Ain't No Such Thing as Superman, and Gorilla especially had kind of intricate percussion on it.
Yeah.
So then tell me about that record, Brian.
So First Minute of a New Day was the representation of our new band. We had been touring with this band for a while, but and we were really anxious to get into the studio and record it. It included Barnett Williams, who was the master drummer elite in Washington, D.C., who I had happened to meet and just felt like we had to have this guy. I mean, even though we already had two percussionists and a drummer, I just felt like we needed to have this guy. I mean, I met Barnett in a dance studio where he played drums for African dancers. He just was in there by himself, practicing. He had a microphone and a Fender amplifier, and he was playing some congas. And when I came in to meet him, he started playing this rhythm, and he told me, "Okay, this is the name of the rhythm. This is what part of Africa it comes from." And then he plays a little bit more, and then he says, "This is the song." He starts singing into the microphone. He said, "This is the song that goes with it," and he's playing, right? And then he gets up, and then he does the dance. He said, "That's the dance that goes along with it." And I thought to myself, I asked him, I said, "So how do you know the same thing about all of the rhythms that you play?" And he said, "Yes, I know all the things about all the rhythms that I play, the history of them, etc., what they mean, the words, the dances that go with it. I am the founder of a society called Society for the Preservation of African Percussion. And that's my job. I take it very seriously." And I thought right then and there, I said, that's what we need in this band, And I asked him to join, and he did. So that was one of the great expansions of the Midnight Band. We did some other expansions after that, but that was probably, I would say, the most key. And couldn't wait to get into the studio and record with that band, with that personnel. And so we did, and it was just basically songs that we had come up with working with the band, and also material that Gil and I had written from before, from the years that we had been writing together before. For instance, A Toast to the People, which showed up on that album.
I think with that record too, Ain't No Such Thing as Superman, to me was really the most solid influence of kind of, getting funk into the mix too.
Mm-hmm.
How did that, what was the genesis of that?
What was the genesis of that? The genesis of that was that it was something that influenced me and all of us. It influenced us greatly. Funk and soul. The first record I bought was Walkin'. The second record I bought was Where Did Our Love Go by the Supremes. In that brief time period, I went back and forth between buying jazz albums and soul albums, Curtis Mayfield and the Impressions. The Temptations, later on Sly and the Family Stone, Jimi Hendrix. So these influences had all been swirling around in all of our brains. This Otis Redding, Al Green. Gil and I used to listen to that stuff up and down while we drove up and down 95 South to gigs, you know, and this was the backdrop of our lives. To include it, to not include it in what we did would have been impossible. It would have been impossible.
So how'd you manage to cut two records that came out in the same calendar year? Were these songs sort of done in same sessions, or were they actually, set separate sessions that
They
you
were
did?
they were different sessions. Trying to remember where we did. I think we did a lot of First Minute. I don't remember. I'm not sure where we did First Minute. I know that we did. Do you have it?
D&B Sound,
Huh?
D&B Sound, Maryland.
Oh, okay. So I was right. So we actually recorded a lot of that album in Jose Williams' studio, the same studio that we recorded Winter in America. So we just stuck with a good thing, Basically, we loved working with Jose, and we stayed there. The second album we recorded at Electric Lady Studio, Jimi Hendrix's the old studio that Jimi Hendrix had built for himself, and it was something I used to pass by that studio all the time on 8th Street in West 8th Street in Manhattan in Greenwich Village, and I always had wanted to go and see what was on the inside. Well, we got our chance, and we recorded that album. There. Yeah.
That must have been a thrill, Electric Lady Land.
Yeah, it was one of the huge thrills of my life.
So from South Africa to South Carolina, this record helped break you, I think, to another level of popularity. Johannesburg, also South Carolina,
yeah,
powerful song. And then you had a real epic track on there, over 9 minutes, Essex. Excuse me. Talk about that record, talk about the Saturday Night Live experience, talk about really starting to get out there and do concerts.
Essex was one of the songs that Bilal Sunni Ali, our saxophonist, had written, and it was a song written. It was a song written for Mark Essex, and I guess you would have to. Those of you who are interested would have to look him up. The system in America, the system of racism in America has caused people to react in many different ways, and some of them many of them are unfavorable. Many of them are desperate, and we look at them, and when you look at the totality of them, I think you begin to get a picture of how devastating some of the things that this country have been to its people. And I think that Mark Essex is a good example of that, actually. And I don't believe that that his solution, or what he felt was the solution, was necessarily the solution that would work for us as a nation, as a people. And we're just to emphasize that point. I mean, we're going through that. We're going through that right now. We're experiencing that right now. So we haven't moved much from 1972 in that regard. And so I guess in that sense, Essex, the song Essex, like the song, like many of the songs that we have done over the years, have been kind of more prophetic than we would have preferred them to be, that we would have liked them to be. But yeah, it was a song written by Bilal Sunni Ali. And if anything, let it point to the sense of desperation and a hopelessness that that many of us find ourselves in. And the solutions, whether acceptable or unacceptable or somewhere in between, are the things that we are called in ourselves to to do. Unfortunately, sometimes some of those things are extremely harmful.
Well, and that definitely speaks to, the timelessness of the body of work that you guys did. I mean, I'm sure when you were doing a lot of it, you thought, wow, this is a social ill right now. But I bet in 30, 40 years, maybe things will be better or won't exist. And now, today, so many years later, does it feel disheartening to see so much strife that's similar to what it was back then?
Yeah, we didn't think that. We didn't think it was going to get any better.
You weren't optimistic, huh?
Yeah, no, we weren't optimistic at all. And I think that if you listen to, like, as you have, you listen to a lot of our music, you'll know that if anything, we were kind of sounding the warning bells, um, trying to kind of wake people up to the fact that if we don't do something now, it's just going to be more difficult to do something later, if not impossible. And this is what we've seen. This is what we've seen. We haven't taken the steps that were necessary, and so now things are further out of control than they were 50 years ago, 40, 50 years ago.
But really, I mean, I don't want to get too political on this. We're mostly music, but can't help it with, the kind of music you guys did,
Yeah.
to some extent. But, when Gil was writing stuff, inspired by, Nixon or inspired by Ronald Reagan, did you ever think you'd have, an administration like we do now? And, what might he have said if he was around today?
Yeah. Wow. Well, I think that I'll tell you, after Nixon, because when Nixon was running for office, I thought to myself, okay, nobody's stupid enough to elect this guy. And then he was elected. And then it came Ronald Reagan. I said, okay, clearly everybody can see this guy as an actor. He's not a president. Got elected, got reelected. And then there was, oh boy, I mean, we go through the Bushes, and each time we thought to ourselves, okay, I thought to myself anyway, okay, people are just not that dense. Obviously, you can see that this is a step backwards. And what happened? And so when Trump ran go ahead. That's okay. Okay. When Trump ran for office, I thought, you know what? I've been saying the same thing for 40 years. And each time I have been, quote unquote, surprised. So this time, let's just assume that Trump wins. And what happened? So, if anything, I think we kind of knew after Richard Nixon was elected, we kind of knew where things were going, and it wasn't getting any better. Surveillance, yes, surveillance was coming on big. A change in policies toward education and defense, was something that was starting to really change, rather than phasing out the money that we spend on the military. We were putting more money into it, rather than finding solutions for nuclear energy, or finding solutions for eliminating some of the greenhouse gases that we that we have, that are destroying the planet, and the pollution that is destroying the planet. We're delving further into it. We're ignoring it even more than we had before. So this has been a steady step. It's been continually happening. It's being furthered by the companies and corporations that benefit the most from it. It's no surprise, and it really has nothing to do with who is president. you know.
But, just when Obama got in office, so did you think that that was signaling, finally a change? Because it seems like it would have really created was a worse backlash in a way.
There was that. Yeah, there was definitely that. And there was also the fact that you're not going to buck insurance companies. You're not, excuse me, you're not going to buck insurance companies and their agenda, nor the pharma companies, nor the agribusiness companies. They are just too large for any one person to take on, and apparently for our government to take on as well. Um, Too many lobbies, too many PACs, too many too many ways for those big businesses to get around uh, above and under people. And so we're in, I mean, it's basically the same as it was in the 70s. There's no change. They've gotten more powerful. That's about it. And their agenda has remained the same. So, you know, yeah, it was good. I mean, historically, it was great that we had Obama as the president. This is something that gave all of us a little hope and a little more faith in humanity, and a little bit more faith in a little bit more hope that America could become um, a less biased place. Um, and that happened. Um, the election happened, but then the backlash, as you say, was tremendous. And in the end, did it really advance us? I wonder. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, now that I have a son, he's 12, and you have your twins, I mean, I'm more concerned than ever. It's a lot different when you're a parent than just when it's yourself. But
Yeah.
So, when you were doing these, for lack of a better term, I think, there are awareness songs about awareness, songs about activism, songs about protest. Do you feel like you affected some change, or do you think it was more just kind of making people somewhat aware? And if you could speak to also just the kind of vibe that we had back in the 70s with a lot of music like that, not as, 100% dedicated to it, but, you had your, tracks by the OJs and
Earth, Wind and Fire, Stevie Wonder,
all those guys, they were at least doing some of their songs that were pointing these things out. Marvin Gaye.
That's right.
How do you feel about the whole movement?
Curtis Mayfield. Yeah. So this is something that I always bring out, that I always point out to people when they say that Gil and I were at the forefront of something, of consciousness movement. I mean, this was the day that we were living in. I mean, all musicians were affected by it. Some of them spoke out, and some of them didn't, and some of them did in their own ways that maybe it was a little too soft for people to actually get. But no, I think everyone was affected in one way or another, particularly in the 70s. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but
well, I was asking how much effect do you think it had on the culture?
Yeah, I mean, how much effect did our music have on the culture, or how much
your music, and in a larger sense, the movement?
I think that it was important that we did what we had to do, because there were people who weren't artists. There were people who didn't have a voice, who felt that we understood them. Or that felt that there were people out there who agreed with them. And I think that people who were in the public eye, or people who had the attention of large number of people, were consistently trying to take advantage of that vantage point, to let people know that they aren't alone, and to let people know that they're not wrong about what they see. And I think that that was our job, to let people know that they were not wrong. If they see this, we see it too. And that's basically all we were trying to do. We didn't feel like we were going to convert anybody. Many times when we performed, we felt like we were preaching to the choir, because the people who were there already knew what we were going to say. They already were on the same page as us when they got there. So it wasn't so much about educating people, even though that was our idealistic notion. Um, it was in the end, it was really about fortifying those who needed it the most, people who could see and realize that something must be done. Going forward, um, years later, I mean, the children of those people and the grandchildren of those people who are listening to these tracks and getting something out of it and getting an understanding of how long some of these problems have existed. I think it helps to give them perspective uh, on exactly what it is that they're dealing with.
I think exactly. I mean, for me, as a teenager growing up with it, I didn't get out there and protest and march and that kind of thing, but it definitely built an awareness within me and broadened my perspective and made me feel angry about injustice in the world.
Yeah.
And so I've carried that with me my whole life as my perspective, and it comes out in how I make decisions, how I vote, what I pass on to my children.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, I think it's a huge, huge important movement.
Exactly.
All right, let's get back to the music a little bit. We were on the album with Johannesburg. You were getting out there and playing more. What do you remember from the road? Any interesting stories from the road? Who you shared the stage with, and maybe something unforgettable that happened while you were out there?
I mean, we shared the stage with so many people that I looked up to, and some people I thought, wow, what am I doing? What am I doing on this gig with these guys for? Like one time, we did a tour of at least um, three or four big concerts with Cameo, the Spinners, and Casey and the Sunshine Band. We were opening up for them. And I'm thinking, okay, yeah, this really is this really is a new era, you know. But then there were other people that we opened up for, who I also wondered what we were doing opening up for them. But people like Herbie Hancock and the Headhunters, or Weather Report and Earth, Wind and Fire. Um, Earth, Wind and Fire had been given a day by the then mayor Thomas Bradley of Los Angeles. He declared an Earth, Wind and Fire Day, and there was going to be a concert held at Hollywood Bowl, and they asked them who they wanted to appear on the show with them, and they chose Weather Report to open up for them, and to open up for Weather Report they chose us, and so that was our first time out to Los Angeles, and that's definitely one of those concerts that I will not forget. Seeing Joe Zawinul walk around backstage with his hands to his side, like almost like a gunslinger, And then somebody described him as they said like he looked like a martial artist, who was scared to move, like scared to move his hands too much in one direction in case he would like knock something down, knock somebody over. He had very powerful hands. And then there was the guys in Earth, Wind and Fire, like Philip Bailey, who carried his vibes around wherever. He's like a tremendous jazz vibraphonist. I don't know if many people know that, but he plays. I thought, wow, it's Milt Jackson here, and I turned the corner. It was Phil outside of the dressing room playing his vibes. He had them brought around with him wherever he was, and Herbie and the Headhunters. I remember that Herbie was one of my great influences, one of my great life influences as far as piano is concerned, and I had been opening for him all this time. And I was trying to get the courage to go and talk to him, and one day Bill Summers, the percussionist in the band, asked me if I wanted to meet him, and I said, "Yeah, I guess I'm ready." To myself, I'm thinking. So I had the speech in mind, and I went. I had the speech. I'm like, Herbie, you're one of the greatest influences in my life. There's so many things that I wouldn't be doing. I probably wouldn't be doing this now if it weren't for you, blah, 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 on and on and on. So I get into the room and Herbie is like sitting right in front of the door. So as soon as I come in, you know, I'm about to introduce myself to him, you know, extend my hand, you know, I'm about to extend my hand and say who I am. Of course, he knows who I am already because I'm, you know, I've been opening for him for, you know, but I didn't know. Yeah, I didn't know whether he hung around to hear us or whatever. So I'm going up to him and I'm getting ready to deliver this speech to him, and he goes, what did you think about? Did you hear the piano? Was it okay? Was it a little distorted, or you know, what did you think of it? How did you find that piano? What did you think of it? And I thought to myself, oh my God, I'm never going to be able to deliver this speech, you know. So we just started talking about the piano, and you know, we started talking about music and stuff, and that was the end of it, you know. I mean, not the end of it, because you know, we've definitely run into each other from time to time, and Herbie's a very nice guy. He's just a really, really down to earth person. So there were all kinds of experiences like that I had on the road. And
you know, some of those pairings that you mentioned make me think of, you know, when the Monkees opened for Hendrix, or I think the Beastie Boys opened for Madonna, you know, so how they get these ideas, you know, but, you know, of course with Herbie and that stuff was ideal, but man, some of those other ones, I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. And Roy Ayers, I used to run into him in airports all the time. That used to be our favorite meeting place. I'd be running for a plane, and he'd be running in the opposite direction for a plane, and we'd look at each other, and we'd be like, you, and then we keep running, you know. So there were things like that.
So in the live performance, though, did Gil progress as a performer, as a stage presence? You know, I know you said that you were shy, but you know, how did you guys cultivate or progress in your live engagement and performance?
Oh wow, musically, I think it was through music. Our music evolved. As our music evolved, it required both of us to evolve personally. And as I was the MD, the music director of the band, you know, it required more and more involvement and more kind of you know, leadership. You know, when we started doing bigger venues and when we started doing you know, TV shows and that kind of thing, it kind of required that I step out a little bit more and be a little bit more assertive as far as that's concerned. That's when we started doing the albums, when we started recording at places like Electric Lady in Tonto with Malcolm Cecil in Santa Monica. It required that, you know, that I be more present, that I try to cut through some of the problems, you know, or whatever that we might be having. Excuse me, that we might be having doing a track, or getting through a track, or working through an arrangement, or rearranging something. You know, it's just that you have to, you know, you have to grow if you're going to succeed in doing your music and in doing it in the way that you hear it, you know, in your head. Gil had to evolve as a singer, and he did. He evolved. He became a great singer, and he became a kind of a comedian. You know, he used to do these skits. These before we started the musical portion of the show, he used to kind of almost like a stand-up routine where he would kind of go through the events of the current events, the events of the day, with his sarcastic, ironic look at them, and would have people in stitches. You know, and this is something that he honed to a razor sharp skill. And as an interviewer, as an interviewee rather, he became very precise, and you know, people began to look at him as a spokesman. As a spokesman for Black folks, and it's something that he never really took to very much. You know, he didn't feel like a spokesman for anybody except himself. And, you know, his opinions didn't stand for, he felt that his opinions didn't stand for a lot of people. But if they agreed, then they agreed, and that was fine. But, you know, he wasn't trying to speak on behalf of anyone. You know, he kind of got pigeonholed into that, and it's something that I think he kind of regretted.
You mentioned the Earth, Wind, and Fire experience, and you know, I had actually made a note that you know you came out with the "It's Your World" double album,
yeah,
and that was kind of similar to what Earth, Wind, and Fire did right around then with Gratitude, where they had you know some studio tracks and they had some live tracks. It was a funky record, and it included, of course, the title track "It's Your World." Possum Slim was pretty funky, and then a longer version live of "The Bottle." Tell me how that record came together.
Well, I think we were thinking about maybe leaving Arista, and we had a 6-album deal, and that was 2. That made it a lot quicker for us to make an exit if we needed to. But also, probably beyond that, and even before that, people had been telling us often that your studio albums are great, but when you guys hit the stage, when you guys hit the stage, there's a magic that you have never captured, that you were never able to capture in the studio. And we thought about that, and it was true. There was a spontaneity that it didn't always translate in the studio. And there was one thing that was so evident, is that the audience was the other part, was the other musician. The audience was the other instrument in our shows. We included everyone in our performances, and that changed the music. So whenever we performed live, of course it was going to be different than in the studio. And what we wanted to do, we really wanted to capture that. We wanted to make sure that we were able to put that, to document that, and put it somewhere on wax. And that was the primary reason for us doing that. And Paul's Mall was a great place where we felt comfortable at Boston. It was a very intimate place.
Home is Where the Hatred on there in particular is epic. I mean, that's really an elaborate, deep cut.
Yeah, we go in, and we kept going in. I mean, from that point till, we played that song all the time. It was kind of a jump off point for exploration for all of the musicians in the band.
And you mentioned Herbie. I unless I'm imagining it, I hear Herbie influence in that cut. Am I wrong?
Sure. No, you're not wrong. You're definitely not wrong as far as the echoplex, the effects that I was using on the keyboard. Absolutely. And the synthesizers, and yeah.
So Bridges dropped the next year, 1977, and to me, I think an interesting title. I don't know if it had anything to do with it, but in a way, it was kind of a little bit of a bridge record in kind of, fully bringing you from where you guys had come to where you were currently and going with, your music and your presentation. So, and you said you were actually thinking about leaving Arista at that time. So what was happening with that record?
So at some point, Clive decided that he was going to drop us in the middle of Santa Monica, to work with Malcolm Cecil in a studio that Malcolm Cecil had designed, with a room full of synthesizers. And I'm not sure if he thought that was going to be that was going to take us to our level of incompetence, and therefore to the admission that we needed some help, that we needed a producer to step in and help us. But if that was his intention, it certainly didn't happen. And I felt quite at home with all of these synthesizers, and Malcolm and I got on famously, and the result was that, you know, was that album, and 1980 and Secrets.
Well, some might, you know, quibble with it being too commercial. I thought it had a perfect blend, frankly. I mean, I really liked what you were doing then. And, you know, songs like Hello Sunday, Hello Road and Racetrack in France. It's funny because the Hello Sunday, Hello Road reminds me a little bit of Boogie on Reggae Woman. I hear some Stevie Wonder influence in that. And then in Racetrack in France, you actually name check Cherie Amour. So I don't know if that was a coincidence or what, but I know Stevie was influenced.
Exactly. Well, we were using the instruments that Stevie had used to make Music of My Mind and so many of those other great albums. Tonto, the room full of synthesizers that Malcolm Cecil and Robin Margouleff had put together. So maybe that had something to do with it. Maybe the spirit of Stevie was still in the room somewhere.
That's a good spirit.
It sure is.
You know, and Vidgolia, that was way funky, that track.
Thank you. Yeah. You can't be in a room of synthesizers, a room full of synthesizers, and not have funk on your mind. And people like the Isley Brothers and Weather Report and Stevie and Billy Preston had all used that stuff, had all used those. And they were great, huge influences on me. All of those artists were huge influences on me. So for me to not get excited by the opportunity to work with those and to not have that reflect in my production style, you know, it's very difficult. You know, very difficult to conceive. So yeah, I embraced the idea of doing funkier stuff. I mean, I was listening to funky stuff. You know, I was listening to what Miles was doing also. Yeah, I was listening to a lot of what the jazz musicians were doing, mixing. They were mixing R&B and funk in their music, and I thought, why not? Why not mix all of those things, and why not mix rock and country and gospel? I mean, why not mix all of it? I mean, because it's all things that we all listen to. I mean, I listened to all of those things coming up, and everybody I knew listened to all those things coming up. So what am I hiding from? You know, what part of myself am I not supposed to expose?
I think that definitely makes the best music, you know, when you bring all those things together, even if it's not in that genre, just taking something from that, qualities from it, and integrating it together for a new whole is what can just make something so amazing.
Exactly.
You know, and actually I was looking at a listing of some of the influences that you cite and continuing, you know, on to more recent years. You know, you have diversity in that list. You know, of course you have the jazz cats that you would expect, and some of the guys we talked about from R&B like Stevie Wonder, but you also mentioned people like Metallica and Steely Dan and all these, I'm not sure if Chuck D or Public Enemy was in there, but all these very diverse influences. So, you know, how important it is for a musician to be an open vessel for that?
I think that if you're not an open vessel for all kinds of music, how can you really call yourself a musician? How can you call yourself somebody who studies music if you're not studying music? You know, sure, we all have our preferences perhaps, but I think it's important really to keep an open mind, because you will find inspiration from some of the least expected areas. And you know, if you're not open to that, you're kind of closing your development. And as a musician, the goal is to always be developing, is to always be learning, to always be open to new ideas.
The problem is that, you know, a lot of the labels and producers, they try to, you know, direct you in the one place. Well, they also try to direct the consumers that way. So, you know, that's
more so that, you know, because there's so much music out there that it's the consumer confusion that they're trying to help alleviate and eliminate, so that person will say, oh, I'm into such and such, so I'm going to go to this box right here and buy something from that. I was never like that. I traveled the whole store. I went around the whole music store looking for stuff. I always found something.
Well, yeah, and you guys were hard to categorize for the record stores back then in the
Yeah,
70s. I remember, I hung out, I lived at those stores, and I'd be like, okay, well, it's in jazz here, it's in R&B here, it's smart
rock.
soul here, it's
Oh.
spoken word over here or something. I
Yeah,
mean,
exactly.
man,
So we succeeded. Broke out of the box. That's what we were trying to do.
yeah. Well, another great record came in '78. It was with Secrets, and Angel Dust was possibly your biggest radio record. It certainly got played a lot. I was in Los Angeles, and KDAY was the big R&B black station back then, and they had it in heavy rotation. That was real slow and funky, but had this kind of like foreboding quality to it, which matched so well with the lyrical content. And back then, I mean, I don't know if people realize what an epidemic PCP had become, especially in the inner city. Can you talk a little bit about that record, Brian?
Yeah, well, see, the thing is that at that time, people considered almost any drug they took a recreational drug, you know. So people considered cocaine a recreational drug, you know. I mean, almost anything. Acid, people were doing LSD, people considered a recreational drug. Everything was a recreational drug. So when PCP came, people were considering that a recreational drug, And like many of those other drugs that I mentioned, like all of those other drugs that I mentioned, they can have some very extremely detrimental effects to your personality or your well-being, and particularly so. I think the speed of how angel dust or PCP could affect one's psychological makeup, I think was kind of astounding to me. I mean, you know, I had seen some people who had smoked angel dust and just completely lost their minds, like within short order.
It took away humanity.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the one case I remember that kind of almost inspired the song was a woman that we knew out in LA who had been smoking some angel dust. First time we saw her, she was talking some crazy stuff, but you know, it's okay. You know, I mean, hey, you know what I mean? It happens. The next time we saw her, she was unkempt. Seemed like she hadn't changed her clothes in a few days. She was talking complete nonsense. She was like completely incoherent. I'm not sure if she knew who we were. She was hearing things. She was talking to the things kind of in a schizophrenic type of way. And the next time I heard about her, she had jumped out of a window because she thought she could fly. So at that point, we're thinking to ourselves, okay, so now there are kids out here, high school kids, you know, junior high school kids who are out there experimenting with this, and it's cheap, it's readily available, and we just felt like, you know what, this is something we got to talk about. You know, I mean, this is just something that we can't let this go. We can't let it go, and so we wrote that song. It was basically, it was for the kids, you know, and maybe for the kids and the parents of the kids.
All right, so Brian, besides Angel Dust, you know, that Secrets album had a lot of other standout cuts. Third World Revolution was like a real up-tempo funk kind of thing that I don't think you guys had really ever done quite like that before. And 3 Miles Down was kind of what I call simmering funk kind of thing. And Angola, Louisiana was sort of a shuffling funk mode similar to Hello Sunday, Hello Road. So what else can you tell me about those sessions? And I also noticed that you had some interesting new players involved, like Greg Fillinganes and Harvey Mason and those kind of guys.
Yeah. Well, would you mention the first one? I think you mentioned Third World Revolution.
Yeah.
I was playing drums on that.
Oh, really?
I finally got to play drums. So take that, Mom. But let me see. Yeah, we were expanding. I mean, you know, it's always kind of the thing about Bridges was that we didn't want it to be another kind of Winter in America with just me and him playing. I mean, that's fine, but you know, I'm no drummer and I'm no guitarist and I'm no, you know, I mean, there were other things that we wanted to include on it that made it, that we wanted to make it feel full. And so on Bridges, Joseph Blocker we brought in, and we brought in Marlo Henderson, who a great guitarist, who I knew from originally, I think from having played with Shaka Khan and Rufus originally. But and so on Secret, we wanted to keep that same feel. We needed a guitarist, and Marlo was the man. Marlo was able to match some of the things that I was doing on the synth with his guitar and with the effects that he brought in, and it was like really a perfect combination. Harvey Mason was the person that we depended on to give us that rock solid soul type of foundation that we were looking for. Because I was playing most of that, I was playing the bass synthesizer parts, and that is very deep and it's very kind of in your face, and you kind of need a drummer who can lock that in. And it's not easy to do when you're not playing together, because most of the time we weren't playing together. You know, I would play the bass lines to a drum machine, and then Harvey would come in and lock that in to lock his part into what I was doing. He was a master. He was a master at that.
And then Greg Philliganes, of course, played keyboards with almost everybody by now.
Yeah, Greg. Yeah, by that time, I think Greg had already. I met Greg when I was when we were doing something with Roy Ayers, and Greg was on the scene. We became friends, and he was always hanging around in the studio, and always with that same excitement and enthusiasm that he brought to everything. And it was just like, well, we couldn't keep him off of the keyboard. You know, it was just, we had to, at some point, we just had to let him play something, you know, so he wouldn't implode, you know what I mean? And it was great to hang out with him, you know, and obviously the results were good.
And you had, I would say, you boosted the background vocals too. You had the Maxine Waters, among others, on there.
Yeah. Well, you're talking about, in particular, 1980, where we had the Waters do a lot of work, but also on Secrets with Angel Dust. We had been thinking about expanding our live band to include vocalists, female vocalists, and we thought this would be a great opportunity to experiment with and see how it worked. And it did. It worked very well. And it helped to expand the vision of our sound. So it was, and they were such professionals. I mean, the Waters are just absolute professionals. I mean, you could basically just sing a part to them and they would harmonize it right there on the spot. I mean, they were great.